Tim Marshall spent 25 years reporting for Sky News, much of that time as its diplomatic editor. He covered crises and catastrophes, wars and elections, from the Balkans to North America, Afghanistan to the Middle East. Now he's written Prisoners of Geography, subtitled 10 Maps that tell you everything you need to know about global politics. It's a book about the geographical realities that underlie and often dictate the way states behave and interact with one another. Tim Marshall, you say in the introduction to this book that the landscape imprisons the leaders of nations, it gives them fewer options, and geography may not be the determining factor in global politics, but it's certainly the most overlooked. Overlooked? Really? Isn't everybody always aware of what geography has, the hand that geography has dealt them?
I think the politicians are. I think the military are. I don't think enough journalists are, and I don't think the general public factors it in enough because it's not mentioned enough. And the example is in Chapter 1. If you know the geography of Russia and you put yourself in Putin's head, if you've been invaded 6, 7 times from the flat land in front of you, you will seek to dominate that flat land. If your ports freeze for 5 months of a year, you can't be a great world power without a global navy, and you haven't got any ports. The only one you've got is in Sebastopol in the Black Sea, and even that's hard to get out of into the world's sea lanes. So the moment that your former partial ally flips into the NATO sphere of influence, you will invade Crimea. You don't have a choice, because you're not going to be the leader that lost the only warm water port they have. And I don't think that was particularly explained in all the events of last year, but I think it was one of the crucial elements.
You will invade. You don't have a choice.
No, because there's no morale. I'm not talking about morality here. I mean, obviously he perhaps shouldn't have invaded, but that's really not part of the equation.
All right, so that's one example, Russia and the North European plain and its vulnerability to invasion, and it has been invaded, as you say, many times in the past. Let's talk about a few others. Pakistan and Afghanistan. Pakistan supported the Taliban, and to the Americans' fury, continues to do so. Now, you suggest that that has as much to do with Pakistan's fear of India as with anything else. Explain that.
Because that's the dominant theme of Pakistan's foreign policy. Overriding everything else is it looks at India. Pakistan has no strategic depth from which to fall back into. If the Indians were to attack, and the fact that they're probably not about to isn't the point. The point is that the politicians plan in case they do.
And they have, of course, been to war several times since independence.
And the only place to fall back is across the Hindu Kush and into Afghanistan. Now, in order to do that, you better have somebody waiting for you that isn't going to attack you. You better have some friends. And that is why Pakistan seeks to dominate Afghanistan, because it fears India. I mean, these are big geopolitical themes, but I'm utterly convinced that they're correct.
China. China is a growing power, tremendously important economically. It's secure within its borders, has been ever since it took over Tibet. You would argue deserts, mountains all around it. But it's now, I was going to say, going for a land grab in the South China Sea. I mean, there isn't a lot of land to grab. They're creating the land, yes. And you would argue that that is motivated by what? Why do they want to do that?
Well, it's an inevitable... It had to happen once they became a world power, especially economically. Once they're out there everywhere in the world, as they are now, they have to guarantee the sea lanes. They have to guarantee they can get to places that they've invested in Africa, the canal they're building in Nicaragua to get through to the Pacific. And if you don't have a blue water navy, one that pushes out from your own borders, that's just a small green water navy, if you patrol boats, essentially. If you don't have a blue water navy, you cannot seek to safeguard your worldwide empire, their economic empire, which is now growing. And it's the Americans that guard the sea lanes. Now, are you really, if you're going to be either the dominant superpower or the same level superpower as America, are you just going to allow them to dominate your backyard? Are you going to allow them to dominate the Malacca Strait? Not a hope in hell. And again, if you leave morality out of it, of course they will push up against the Americans, seek to dominate the area around them, and then keep pushing. And for me, how that relationship is managed, as they will bump. Let's just hope they don't crash into each other.
You mentioned the canal that the Chinese are proposing to build across Nicaragua, a sort of rival to the Panama Canal. That is one example, and there are others. There's another in your book, a plan, again, involving China to create a land route through the Hindu Kush into Pakistan, which would give them access to Pakistan's warm water ports. Isn't it the case that technology these days, in many ways, allows countries to circumvent the limitations of geography?
Yes, they bend the bars of the prison, but you're never going to get rid of the Himalayas, and so China and India are more or less cut off from each other. You know, there are some iron rules, but yes, absolutely, technology does bend them, and it always has.
What about the future? You talk a couple of times about the prospect of water wars. It's an obvious area of potential conflict. One I didn't realise was a potential issue was between Egypt and Eritrea. Eritrea controls the headwaters of the Nile.
Yeah.
Ethiopia controls the headwaters of the Nile and could hold Egypt to ransom by building a dam and preventing the flow.
It could, and again, just because it's probably not going to, Egypt doesn't not plan for that eventuality. Now, the Egyptians have to plan in case the headwaters of the Nile are cut off. It is their lifeblood. They only have 700 miles of the Nile, and if that water trickles to a halt, Egypt just collapses. And the game was given away. There was a cabinet meeting a couple of years ago where they forgot the cameras were still rolling. There was a fixed camera. And they carried on talking, and one of the ministers said, look, why don't we just put the plan together to bomb them now in case we have to bomb them later? And the cat was out of the bag. I mean, we all knew that they planned this sort of stuff. So, yeah, water wars are possible, also between Turkey, Iraq, Syria. But this is why you have to learn to share and to plan and to use your technology in a sharing way, which would bring us, I think, forgive me, you're in charge, Nick, to the Arctic.
I was about to say, the Arctic.
And space. You know, let's cooperate.
The signs are that in the Arctic, at least, with the possible exception of Russia, which always behaves a bit like a bully, everybody is cooperating, and the potential for conflict over the divvying up of resources in the Arctic has gone away.
So far, so good. There are various forums in which to discuss these issues. The law of the sea, UNCLOS, does apply. And it's such a hostile environment out there. You'd be crazy to try and do it on your own. Just get round a table. There's an awful lot of natural resources down there. If you take the view that they're going to be brought out, as opposed to thinking they shouldn't be, which is another view, and obviously the great states take the view it should come out of the water, cooperate. Otherwise, it'll get messy, and you really don't want a war up there.
Tim Marshall, thank you very much indeed.